Hidden beneath layers of earth in modern-day Turkey lies a site that rewrites history, Göbekli Tepe, a site so advanced in construction that it shatters the mainstream narrative of human civilization. But what if this wasn't just an ancient temple? What if Göbekli Tepe was something far greater, a remnant of knowledge preserved from a world lost in the flood? Why was the site deliberately buried? Why has less than 10% of it been excavated? And why do mainstream archaeologists seem hesitant to unearth what could be one of the most significant discoveries in human history? Could Göbekli Tepe hold proof of a biblical historical timeline, one that challenges everything we think we know? If you think that sounds surprising, wait until you see what the carvings on these pillars might actually be telling us. Stay with me, because the discoveries ahead will challenge everything we've been told about history. But before we dive into these mysteries, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because the information you're about to hear is not what mainstream history wants you to know. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let's start with what mainstream archaeology tells us. Göbekli Tepe was first discovered in the 1960s, but serious excavations didn't begin until the mid-1990s. What they found was shocking. Massive T-shaped stone pillars, weighing up to 20 tons each, arranged in circular enclosures. The site was dated by archaeologists to around 9600 BC, meaning it predates the supposed advent of civilization by thousands of years. According to mainstream historians, at this point in history, humans were still hunter-gatherers, living in small tribal communities with no knowledge of complex construction. Yet, somehow, these so-called primitive people built one of the most sophisticated megalithic sites in the world. Theories abound. Some claim it was a temple for a forgotten religion. Others say it was a center for ritualistic activity, but there's one glaring problem. None of these make sense. The people who supposedly built Göbekli Tepe had no tools, no agriculture, and no recorded means of organizing such a monumental effort. So where did this knowledge come from? And Göbekli Tepe is not alone. Similar questions arise when you look at other sites like Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where massive stones were cut and fitted together with such precision that not even a razor blade can fit between them. Or Nan Madol in the Pacific, a city built on water with thousands of perfectly stacked basalt pillars. How did these early civilizations develop such advanced stone cutting techniques? If history is linear, these sites shouldn't exist. The scale of construction at Göbekli Tepe raises significant questions about how such large stones are transported and positioned. The T-shaped pillars, some reaching up to 18 feet in height and weighing as much as 20 tons, were carved from limestone quarries located miles away. Mainstream archaeologists claim that early humans, still in the Stone Age, accomplished this using only primitive stone tools. But even modern engineers struggle to explain exactly how these massive blocks were moved without the use of wheels, pulleys, or pack animals. If Göbekli Tepe was truly the first known monumental structure of humanity, where did these builders gain such knowledge? Why do similar construction techniques appear in sites around the world, separated by vast oceans and thousands of years? But here's where things get interesting. If we shift away from mainstream dating and look at the biblical timeline, things start to align in ways that secular archaeology refuses to acknowledge. The Bible describes a pre-flood world, where humanity was far more advanced than we're led to believe. Sites like Pumapunku, where massive, precision-cut stones were shaped with a level of accuracy that modern tools struggle to replicate. Or Baalbek, where massive stone blocks weighing over 1,000 tons were somehow transported and positioned with an expertise beyond the supposed capabilities of ancient civilizations. These civilizations were influenced by forbidden knowledge, corrupted by fallen beings, and reached dangerous levels of power. Then came the flood, a divine reset. The Bible itself offers clues that pre-flood civilizations were far more advanced than we assume. In Genesis, we read that early men lived for centuries, passing down knowledge and skills over many generations. The descendants of Cain, for example, are described as metalworkers, musicians, and city builders. This contradicts the mainstream narrative of hunter-gatherers slowly developing civilization over thousands of years. The Book of Enoch, an extra-biblical text referenced by early church fathers, describes a time when fallen angels, known as the Watchers, descended to earth and imparted forbidden knowledge to mankind. This included metallurgy, astronomy, and the construction of great structures. Could Göbekli Tepe be a remnant of that forgotten and forbidden knowledge? If the pre-flood world was advanced as these texts suggest, then it's not only possible but likely that these sites, like Göbekli Tepe, are echoes of that lost civilization. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Despite being one of the most significant discoveries in history, only 10% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. That's right, 90% of this site remains untouched. Why? Despite its global significance, excavation at Göbekli Tepe has been painfully slow. Reports from Hurriyet Daily News suggest that at the current pace, it could take decades before the site is fully uncovered. Why such delays? Why is only 10% of the site excavated while 90% remains untouched beneath the soil? Some researchers believe that the hesitation stems from what further excavations might reveal. If Göbekli Tepe predates mainstream timelines for civilization, it would force archaeologists to reevaluate everything we thought we knew about early human history. There is also the issue of institutional resistance. Mainstream archaeology often dismisses evidence that contradicts the accepted evolutionary narrative. As independent researcher Jimmy Corsetti of Bright Insight has pointed out, entire areas of the site are being left untouched and even covered up with trees. Could this be a deliberate effort to prevent controversial discoveries from coming to light? The idea that history is selectively preserved is not new. Independent researchers and alternative historians have long argued that sites like Göbekli Tepe challenge mainstream historical models. Many of these researchers, such as Graham Hancock and Jimmy Corsetti, have suggested that civilization is far older than what we've been led to believe. One of the key pieces of evidence supporting the idea of a lost civilization is the deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe. Unlike other ancient sites that fell into ruin naturally over time, Göbekli Tepe was intentionally covered, an act that took an incredible amount of effort. Why? Was this done to preserve it for future generations, or was it buried to hide something that didn't fit the accepted narrative? One of the most striking features of Göbekli Tepe is its detailed animal carvings. The site features depictions of lions, snakes, birds, foxes, and even creatures that don't seem to match any known species. Some believe these carvings represent the fauna of the time, but others argue that they hold a deeper significance. The carvings of Göbekli Tepe are not random. The intricate depictions of animals, humanoid figures, and strange abstract symbols suggest a highly developed system of communication, possibly even an early form of writing. But what were these symbols meant to convey? Some scholars believe that the carvings represent an early form of religious or spiritual belief, possibly linked to shamanism or early animistic traditions. However, others argue that these symbols could hold astronomical or mythological significance. One of the most compelling theories is that they encode a historical record, possibly even an account of the events leading up to the Great Flood. Could the builders of Göbekli Tepe have been attempting to preserve the knowledge of their civilization before it was wiped away? If so, what does that say about the lost history of humanity? Another theory gaining traction is that Göbekli Tepe wasn't just a spiritual or cultural site, but an astronomical observatory. Many ancient structures across the world, from Stonehenge in England to the pyramids of Egypt, are known to be aligned to celestial bodies. Could Göbekli Tepe be part of this tradition? Several researchers have suggested that the arrangement of the massive pillars may have been aligned to track solstices, equinoxes, or even constellations. Some believe that the carvings on the stone pillars aren't just depictions of animals, but symbolic representations of star clusters. If this is true, then Göbekli Tepe may have been one of the earliest known sites where ancient people studied the heavens, perhaps even predicting celestial events, much like later civilizations would do. But what would this mean? Did these early people have an advanced understanding of astronomy? And if so, where did they acquire this knowledge? Could this be further evidence of a pre-flood knowledge passed down through Noah's descendants, or even a remnant of what the Watchers taught mankind, as the Book of Enoch describes? One of the most intriguing aspects of Göbekli Tepe is its intricate carvings. These aren't just random depictions of animals or abstract symbols. They may tell a story far older than what we realize. Could these carvings be a record of the Great Flood, passed down by the survivors who rebuilt civilization? Several researchers have theorized that the symbols of Göbekli Tepe's pillars might not just be representations of wildlife, but rather a coded message, a story of destruction and rebirth. Some of the carvings appear to depict a catastrophic event, possibly a great flood. The presence of vultures, serpents, and celestial symbols could indicate a sky-born disaster, aligning with flood myths found across the world. But there's another possibility. What if Göbekli Tepe's carvings were not only recording history, but also serving as a map? Some researchers believe that the animals and symbols etched into the stone pillars may have been used to indicate directions or locations, perhaps safe zones in a post-flood world. Could the builders of Göbekli Tepe have encoded knowledge meant to guide future generations to key locations where civilization could be reestablished? If this theory is correct, then Göbekli Tepe was much more than a mere religious center. It was a beacon of knowledge, carefully preserving the past while providing a roadmap to the future. Could it be that Noah's descendants, or those who remembered the flood firsthand, left these clues to ensure that the new world would never forget the one that came before it? While mainstream historians argue that Göbekli Tepe existed in isolation, there are striking similarities between this site and later ancient civilizations. Could it have been that a cultural or technological precursor to the great societies of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond existed at Göbekli Tepe? One of the most fascinating connections is between Göbekli Tepe and the later Sumerian civilizations, one of the first known advanced societies. The Sumerians believed in a time before their own history, a golden age when gods walked among men and passed down knowledge. Their mythology speaks of a divine being bringing civilization to mankind, a story that mirrors the Watchers of the Book of Enoch and aligns with biblical history. Could Göbekli Tepe have been a remnant of that pre-flood era, serving as a bridge between the lost civilization of the antediluvian world and the emerging cultures of the post-flood era? Was it a place where the survivors of a global cataclysm attempted to rebuild, passing on scraps of knowledge that would later become the foundation for human civilization? If Göbekli Tepe connects to the civilizations that followed, then history as we know it needs to be rewritten. It suggests that the great societies of the ancient world didn't emerge independently, but rather inherited knowledge from an earlier, lost civilization, one that may have been wiped away by the Great Flood. If Göbekli Tepe truly predates all known civilizations, then we must ask, who built it, and where did they go? The structures at the site do not exist in isolation. Similar construction styles and symbols appear at other ancient sites across the world, from Egypt to Mesopotamia to the Americas. The Bible tells us that after the flood, Noah's descendants spread across the earth, carrying with them the knowledge of the pre-flood world. Could Göbekli Tepe have been a remnant of that knowledge? A place where Noah's descendants gathered to remember what was lost and rebuild a world centered on true worship of God? Genesis 11 describes how mankind, instead of spreading across the earth as commanded, gathered to build the Tower of Babel, a defiant act against God. Maybe Göbekli Tepe could have been a precursor to Babel, an early attempt to reestablish centralized religious worship that may have later been corrupted? Could this site have been a place where survivors of the flood tried to hold on to pre-flood knowledge, but like many others, it too became a hub of idolatry and was ultimately buried, whether by divine intervention or by its own inhabitants? One thing is certain: the mainstream explanations do not hold up. The vast knowledge required to construct Göbekli Tepe, combined with its intricate carvings, suggests that it was far more than just a primitive religious site. Could it be that this place was where the righteous descendants of Noah gathered? Perhaps even a site meant to honor God before humanity once again fell into rebellion. If Göbekli Tepe is evidence of biblical history, then it forces us to reconsider everything we think we know about early civilization. It suggests that ancient humanity was not a collection of primitive hunter-gatherers, but instead the offspring of those who survived a world-shattering event and sought to reclaim the lost knowledge of a world that had been washed away. What do you think? Was Göbekli Tepe a pre-flood structure, a post-flood knowledge hub, or maybe something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more content like this, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are just getting started.